get to look down and see everyone in this little camera is nice. I want to say hi to everybody else. All right, well, we've got 40 seconds till 5 o'clock. Oh, now 10 seconds, look at that. So the crowds rush in here at the last moment. All right, today we're going to read about the Master's birthday celebration at Dakshineshwar. So it'll be festive and nice. May our hearts be open. May we take this time to be reminded of love and of grace. May our wills absorb that and commit ourselves to opening to share that love and that grace, to find no limit in ourself for loving, to find no limit in ourself to our compassion and to our caring and to our goodwill. May these words be wise to us. May our heart hear them. May our lives be inspired to be different through them as we read. Sunday, February 18th, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna arrived at Govinda Mukherjee's house in Belgaria, near Calcutta. Besides Narendra, Ram and other devotees, some of Govinda's neighbors, and others were present. The Master first sang and danced with the devotees. Oh, I forgot to do that today. To sing and dance together. That's how we should start our time with God. Indeed, what a good idea. So the Master first sang and danced with the devotees. After the kirtan, they sat down. Many saluted the Master. Now and then he would say, "Bow before God." Indeed, always reminding us of that power, that intense manifestation of divinity that is the divine, that intense peace that brings you to your knees when it's seen, when you walk through the redwood forest, that beautiful silence. That is the closest thing we'll have to the manifestation of the spirit of the divine, the unmanifest. That, who is that? Eckhart Tolle. I'll talk about this tomorrow some, but he says that pay attention to the silence between words and the space between objects, because that is the closest way that the unmanifest can show itself to the senses. Now, of course, there's nothing legal about that statement, but it's that notion of bow before God. Always be aware of this immense beauty, this immense presence of that divine beloved. It is God alone, he said, who has become all of this. Everything around us, everything we've ever seen. That's why Vivekananda tells us, again, I always remind myself of this teaching, to stop seeking God and to start seeing God. Because we swim in God like a fish in the ocean. He's everywhere around us. Eckhart Tolle had that realization early on that light and love were the same thing. And that being the case, there it is, love all around us, lighting and nourishing the entire universe, actually. So it is God alone, he said, who has become all of this. But in certain places, for instance, in a holy man, there is a greater manifestation than in others. You may say, there are wicked men also. No, that is true. Even as there are tigers and lions, but one need not hug the tiger god. One should keep away from him and salute him from a distance. Take water, for instance. Some water may be drunk, and some others used for worship. Some water will be used for bathing, and some water will only be good for washing dishes with. So he's telling us there the way to get along in this world, that we have a heart of trust. But when we're around people who are not trustworthy, you have a responsibility to protect yourself, to store up that trust, to be willing to give them another chance, to be willing to stay open toward them, not to write them off, but you can treat them from a distance, give that space to yourself, not to be burned unnecessarily, but still to respect and honor them as a person, as someone who is potentially divine. A neighbor, revered sir, what are the doctrines of Vedanta? The master, well, the Vedanta says, I am he. Brahman is real and the world illusory. Even the I is illusory. Only the Supreme Brahman exists. But the I cannot be got rid of. Therefore it is good to have the feeling, I am the servant of God. I am his son. I am his devotee. For the Kali Yuga, the path of bhakti, the path of devotion, is especially good. One can realize God through bhakti also. As long as one is conscious of the body, one is also conscious of objects. Form, taste, smell, sound, touch, these are the objects. It is extremely difficult to get rid of the consciousness of objects, and one cannot realize I am he as long as one is aware of objects. This notion of being aware of objects, it's a function of mind that produces this universe for us. Pure mind and Brahman, a pure mind being a mind that's not disturbed by me and mine at all, that pure mind and Brahman are one and the same. And when we live in the thought world, when we live in our mind, where we're constantly listening to the chatter of the conversations of mind, and taking that to be our knowledge and our evidence of existence and of our being and of our nature, then we live in the world of objects. We can't break out of it. We won't be able to see the nature of things, because the mind, when it's got that me and mine impurities in it, it creates an ego, a sense of I that's particular, individualistic. That particular becomes a perspective from which God is viewed. And God can't be recognized as such from that perspective. It's like being on a merry-go-round. If you were to paint a picture of what the playground looked like around you while you're spinning on the merry-go-round, well, it would just be a bunch of horizontal colored lines, You would have no idea how things really looked and how they fit together. You have to come off of that merry-go-round in order to see the buildings as they are, to see the trees and flowers and other kids as they are. And so it is with spiritual life. We have to come out of mind. We talk about transcending mind, and what that is really stepping outside of it, to quiet it, to let it cease its endless chatter, to stop being interested in all of the noise that it's constantly making and all of the partial truths and wrong conclusions that it's drawing for us all the time. So he's saying here, yes, this is all God. Everything is God. Everything else is illusory. He gives that clue. Anything changing is unreal. That which is unchanging alone is divine, is real. And that's a very beautiful way for you to begin a meditation, is to try to intuit that self that's unchanging in you. That little girl or little boy, it's actually neither of those, but as a starting point, that little boy or that little girl that is within you that has always been there, always looking out at this wide world, and wondering about it and trying to find its place in it and trying to find its fulfillment and its happiness, rather finding much frustration. So identify with that unchanging self, and if you can find that place within you, root yourself there. For that is the middle of the shrine. That is the middle of your temple of the body, where God herself inhabits. So in this time, the Kali Yuga, which is, some say that's where we are now in the Kali Yuga, certainly looks like it these days, the practices of devotion are most helpful for finding the beloved, for finding God, for finding out your nature. But he says it's difficult to get rid of this sense of I. So go ahead and allow that sense of I to exist, but associate it with things like worship and service and love and compassion and wisdom and intelligence, and spend your time ruminating about those things in the mind, because that's the antidote to selfishness. the antidote to the me and mine that's preventing you from your fulfillment. The sannyasi is very little conscious of worldly objects, but the householder is always engrossed in them. Therefore it is good for him to feel, I am the servant of God. Neighbor, sir, we are sinners. What will happen to us? Master, all the sins of the body fly away if one chants the name of God and sings his glories. The birds of sin dwell in the tree of the body. Singing the name of God is like clapping your hands. As at the clap of a hand the birds in the tree fly away, so do our sins disappear at the chanting of God's name and glories. And the beautiful challenge in that is you have to let them fly away. You have to let them fly away. You can't clap your hands and sing God's name and think that it's not working for you. You can't sit there and still hold on to all of your self-hatred and your self-punishment and your remorse and your shame and whatnot. You can't hold on to all of that and sing the name of God and not let the birds fly away. So when you call on the name of God, it's really a call to remember grace. You are in the presence of a grace that's unlike anything you can find in this world. You have nothing to relate it to, so it's not something you can know in your mind, because this grace has no limit. It has no requirement. And that is something that is very difficult for us to trust. We don't trust things that don't have definable limits that we can't hold and understand. But the love of God and the grace of the divine has no limit. And so it's that knowledge that inspires us forward. It's that trust and that faith which is the foundation for being able to see God, for being able to be in the presence of God without that need to hide or to cover, without that need to take refuge in things and ideas that give us our comfort instead of that absorption in the love of the beloved. Again, you find that the water of a reservoir dug in a meadow is evaporated by the heat of the sun. Likewise, the water of the reservoir of sin is dried up by singing the name and glories of God. You must practice it every day. Yes, every day. That's a great assignment. Every day you should clap and sing the name of God. Just in your apartment, running around, clapping your hands, chanting the name of God. It's a beautiful ideal, and Thakur or Sri Ramakrishna, I mean, what a joy. You read in the Gospel, almost every page there's a mention of laughter, of great joy. And Vivekananda says that if your spiritual life does not bring you great joy, you're not doing it right. If it's not the source and seed of love in your life, of bliss in your life, then back up, sit down for a moment, reorient yourself, and think a little bit more about this divine love, about this divine grace, and challenge your trust a bit more to remember the name of God. You must practice it every day. The other day at the circus, I saw a horse running at top speed with an Englishwoman standing on one foot on its back. How much she must have practiced to acquire that skill. Weep at least once to see God. These then are the two means, practice and passionate attachment to God. That is to say, restlessness of the soul to see Him. That is the way, that restlessness of the soul to see the beloved. And if the heart's not like that now, if you don't often think of God, don't despair. Just start. Just start. Brother Lawrence has a wonderful remedy. He says he learned, it took him 15 years to master it, but he learned to think of God constantly, to always, without exception, every minute, every second. He wasn't talking metaphors. He's saying every minute, every second, he was aware of the presence of God. And he said that any time that my mind happened to wander away, or if I found myself forgetting, or I found myself having been mindless for a moment, he says, I simply put my mind back in the presence of the beloved, made my apologies, and kept going. Don't let yourself get tied up in your faults. Don't let yourself kick yourself around the block because you're awful, because that belongs to body and mind. You are that ever pure, ever blissful self, and that is the self that God dances with. That's the self that God sees when she looks at you. And that's a beautiful thing. You know, that Man of La Mancha, that wonderful play about that crazy guy who has this band of good-for-nothings around him, but he's in this delusion. He sees himself as this great knight, and he sees only the highest in all of his friends. You know, his friends are like prostitutes and drunkards and, I mean, just the real dregs of society. But he sees them as queens and kings and princes and these fine people, and everybody's always ridiculing him. And he passes away and goes away. But what he leaves behind is a ragtag group that has become princes and kings, because he looked at them and saw that in them and inspired it in them. You know, when a holy person, a truly holy person, looks at you, it's a thrill that goes through you, because they're seeing your very highest ideal. They're seeing the you that you only wish you could possibly be. They recognize that in you. That's where that love for you comes from, because they know the you that you haven't yet allowed to come out yet, that you haven't trusted love enough to manifest yet. Weep at least once to see God. These are the two means: practice and passionate attachment to God, restlessness of the soul to see him. Sri Ramakrishna began his midday meal with the devotees. It was about 1 o'clock. A devotee sang in the courtyard below, "Awake, mother, awake! How long you have been asleep in the lotus of the Muladhara. Fulfill your secret function, mother. Rise to the 1,000-petaled lotus within the head, where mighty Shiva has his dwelling. Swiftly pierce the 6 lotuses and take away my grief, O essence of consciousness." What a wonderful song. Just that's an idea for your chanting, and when you're running or dancing around the house in your slippers, come on, come dance with me. There's a wonderful Hafiz poem about that, actually, where this man or woman is dancing on the roof of their house at night, singing God's name. And Hafiz is saying, oh, if you had only twirled just 2 more times and chanted the name of God just once, we would have arrived to be with you. But we got to your roof just when you stopped singing. So always have that kind of anticipation also, because your success in spiritual life is not in accordance with your achievement, with your effort. It truly is not. It comes to you through grace, and through grace alone. The problem is that if it comes to you and you haven't built it on grace, you've built it on your achievements or built it on your efforts, you'll have a lot of holes in the bucket, and that blessing won't remain with you. It'll be a high for a few minutes or maybe a day or maybe even a week, but eventually it'll flow through all the unpatched holes. So our effort turns us into a worthy vessel. Our efforts and our practices, they plug up all the holes, as it were, so that when God pours that divine love within us, we can actually hold on to it long enough to turn around and give it to someone else. That was a lesson that I got from my sannyas guru when I took my vows. He told all of us, he says, do not think that as monks that it is your duty to create bliss for the world. He said, God has churned an ocean of amrita, an ocean of bliss already. It's yours to become pure vessels, so that when he fills up your hands, you can turn around to the world and give it to the world. So this is why we have intense practices. This is why we do our disciplines and our austerities. Not to seek God, because he already is everywhere. It's a matter of seeing him. It's a matter of opening to it. So that's a given. But to become pure enough to hold that, to become pure enough to enjoy the embrace of the divine. Hearing this song, Sri Ramakrishna went into samadhi. His whole body became still, and his hand remained touching the plate of food. He could eat no more. After a long time, his mind came down partially to the plane of the sense world, and he said, "I want to go downstairs." A devotee led him down very carefully. Still in that abstracted mood, he sat near the singer. The song had ended. The master said to him humbly, "Sir, I want to hear the chanting of the mother's name again." So the musician sang, "Awake, mother, awake. How long have you been asleep in the lotus of the Muladhara?" The master again went into ecstasy. And this ecstasy is the natural state. It's the natural state of an authentic human being. It's what happens when you actually see your beloved everywhere. That stillness that Thakur became a statue, so still that the doctor could go up and touch his eye, and there was no reaction on the part of the master at all. That state, your body is a manifestation of the condition of your mind. If your life is frenetic and busy and noisy and running here and running there, that's the condition of your mind. A mind should be still. A mind should be silent unless it's being asked. A mind is your child. The mind is your toddler. You have to raise your mind and discipline your mind and teach your mind. But when your mind is in its highest state like this, there is nothing but pure silence there. And that silence is so profound it manifests in body as well. And then it manifests in the atmosphere around you. And then the whole room will go silent because it travels from the inside out like that. That's our mistake, actually. Because when we talk about ourselves, we always define ourselves from the outside in. I have this hair color and these color eyes and this gender and this age and this money, and I like these things and I don't like those things. But that's not who we are. That's the outside in. And most of us can't come up with a single word because we've never been in there. We're always living in the noisy mind and looking out through all the portholes of the senses just to be entertained by the dance of the changing world. So the effort is go inside, and in that stillness, in the contentment that the divine brings, live your life. February 25th, 1883. After his noon meal, the master conversed with the devotees. Ram, Kedar, Nityagopal, M., and others had arrived from Calcutta. Rakal, Harish, Latu, and Hazra were living with the master. Mr. Choudhury, who had 3 or 4 university degrees and was a government officer, was also present. He had recently lost his wife and had visited the master several times for peace of mind. The master to Ram and the other devotees. Devotees like Rakal and Narendra, like Bhavanat also, may be called Nitya Siddha. Their spiritual consciousness has been awake since their very birth. They assume human bodies only to impart spiritual illumination to others. There is another class of devotees known as Kripa Siddha. That is to say, those on whom the grace of God descends all of a sudden, and who at once attain his vision and knowledge. Such people may be likened to a room that has been dark 1,000 years, which, when a lamp is brought into it, becomes light immediately, not little by little. Those who lead a householder's life should practice spiritual discipline. They should pray eagerly to God in solitude. Turning to Mr. Choudhury. God cannot be realized through scholarship. Who indeed can understand the things of the Spirit through reason? No, all should strive for devotion, for the lotus feet of God. There's some very big clues here about realization. It doesn't happen in the mind. It doesn't happen according to a philosophy or to a height of knowledge. It's not thought castles. It's before mind. So try and find that space in you before mind. And you can do that by doing that practice of trying to hush the mind. And while you're trying to hush the mind, you're watching it intensely. to notice its patterns, to begin to see that the mind brings thoughts to you. You don't bring thoughts to the mind. The mind brings thoughts to you. And when you start to recognize that there's patterns to those thoughts from habits and experience in the past, then you get that distance. You begin to understand, hey, wait a minute, that's a pattern. That's not a thought that I just put in my mind. What is this? And you begin to realize that your mind is just excreting thought, just like your sweat glands excrete sweat. The mind is no different. It just excretes thought, one after the other. And you can know that because you can never have an original thought. Every thought is directly related to the previous thought, and every thought leads to the next thought. That's the nature of mind. It's a relative machine. So by studying the mind that way, through the silence inside where you can sit and watch, you can learn these things, and that will reduce your idea of being mind, of being body, because you will notice that the body has to tell you when it's hungry. If the body was you, it wouldn't have to tell you. You know? When the mind has a thought, it has to tell you that thought. It has to present that thinking to you, that idea to you. If the mind was you, it wouldn't have to present anything to you. You would know it at the same time. So watch the mind and learn these things and understand them carefully, because this is how we come to know our real nature. Not everything has to be a matter of faith in the sense of believing something for no reason. These are truths that are real in this manifested world as well as the spiritual world. So by paying attention, by developing awareness, we can see properly. And when we become aware and we begin to see properly, then it kind of takes us on a very interesting ride, actually, as we begin to understand the nature of things. And the world turns out to be very different from what we thought that we lived in. And we actually come to understand that it lives in us. We are not in it. Like a dream, all right? A dream while you're in the dream, while it surrounds you. But then when you wake up, you realize the dream was in you. You were not in the dream. And it's also moved into another form, with another name and another life and another circumstance, and how completely and utterly you forgot the life of the dreamer, the body in the bed. You left that so easily behind. Now you don't even question it in the dream. You have no notion of it at all. So is it any wonder that right now you have no notion of your higher self? If you can forget this whole life in a snap when you fall asleep in a dream, and can take on a new body and a new identity without even a stumble of questioning, then it is any wonder that our delusion is so complete in the waking state, that our identity is so utterly misplaced. We have no clue, and we think, we often think, well, if it was true, how come it's not obvious to me? Swami Tattvamayinanda always told me, he says, that's the nature of the scriptures. The scriptures are there not to tell you what God is, but to tell you what God isn't, so that that which is obvious can become apparent to you. So that is the reading for today. I think the highlight in there is that you must practice every day, that you must weep at least once to see God. These are the two means, practice and passionate attachment to the divine, the restlessness of the soul to see him. Any questions? Concerns? Arguments? Corrections? All right.
We have one question. Hold on.
Okay. She's coming to you, John.
What is the name of God?
What's the name of God?
You say chant. I've got everything except you say chant the name of God.
Mm-hmm.
What name do I use?
It's up to you. Pick one. Pick one. My grandfather used to call my grandmother Chicken.
Well, I come from studying with the Jewish people who say they've forgotten the name of God, so this is a little novel to me.
Yes. Well, come up with a nickname. There isn't a right name of God. God, a child will make any sound, da. And Dad will just
Okay.
run from the other room, thrilled to death. I heard da. You know, he didn't hear Dad. He didn't hear anything proper. But the child called out with the impulse from inside, da. And the father came running. Call God by any name that comes from the inside, and she will respond. There will be a response. You know,
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. Rabia wrote that poem. That's one of my, I've got a little basket of things I share over and over, and that's one of them. Rabia's poem. She complained that she had called on God for decades and never got a response. And she was sitting there wondering, I wonder if I'm using the right name. And she says, then I just chose a name that was special just between me and God. And the last line of her poem, it says, and that has made all the difference. So I encourage people, you know, in the shrine, in your time with God, come up with a nickname. Hey, chicken. Sweetie dumpling, you know. These things, because when you love somebody, that's what you do, right? You've always got nicknames for your lovers, for the people in your family, for your close friends. So it is with the beloved also. Yes.
Swami, as far as you know, did the direct disciples of Ramakrishna, either amongst themselves or directly with Ramakrishna, what did they refer to him? I mean, did they just think of, say, Lord or Thakur, which, you know, Bengali word for Lord or Master? What would you say that they?
Well, I mean, it's clear that M called him master, since he used that to highlight him everywhere in the gospel. I think that depended on their relationship. I think probably he was called Ramakrishna by many. He probably his boyhood name by some.
Noran referred to him as Pluto, the old man.
The old man, that's right. Oh my God, you remind me of that's my favorite writing too. When he's writing about the master, he refers to both Holy Mother, you know, whom we have such a reverence for. I mean, we built these wonderful temples around them. And Vivekananda was like, oh yes, the old man and his wife. You know, that casual intimacy when you're that close to somebody, the respect and formalities are not necessary. But be sure that you have the sincerity and the closeness before you do that. But a nickname, you know, I encourage a nickname. A nickname fosters that intimacy. That nickname for God, but only use it with God, and only when you are with God. Don't go running and telling everybody your nickname for God. All right. So let's take some time to meditate, get ready for Arati at 6 o'clock, and enjoy the presence of the beloved right here and right now. Jai Thakur, Jai Ma, Jai Swamiji.